Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Oh, one person's awake in the room. That's nice. That's nice to know. For those of you who were paying attention yesterday in one of our sessions in the main hall, we talked about the human angle to retail and what it was like as a middle manager in Indian retail to report to a boss who occasionally wasn't local, what the learnings could be from someone who'd been parachuted into the country, and whether there was a benefit to having someone like that here. I've got a great panel with me today to talk about the expat experience. And we're going to talk about how global best practices that CEOs can bring in from other parts of the world, other geographies, other markets, into the retail experience in India. And I'm joined on stage by Brian Bade, CEO of Reliance Digital, Mark Ashman, CEO of Hypercity, Mark Latham, President Home Business at Future Group, Michael Pike, CEO of Brandspoke, and Simon Jury, Country Head of dunnhumby. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Let me start by throwing this open to all of you. Should there be a difference in how you term a CEO or a manager? Does it matter whether that manager is an expat or not? Should it just not be about his or her experience, what he or she brings to the table, brings to the business, not about the color of his skin or the nationality on his passport?
Yeah, I would absolutely say, of course, that is, any CEO, whether they're from a different country, from India, they're going to bring their own unique perspective and vision in that. So, no, absolutely, everyone should get the opportunity based on merits, their knowledge, and their passion for the business. And to me, I would hire someone on my team, regardless of what country they were from, just based on their experience. And I think that'll happen more and more as retail grows here.
No, I mean, I totally agree. I think why am I here? I guess it's about experience, and we're in a sector, retail, which is really just beginning on its journey in India. And so the opportunity for an expat like myself to come is because I come with experience. I've run retail businesses in other parts of the world. In terms of any other difference, I think, color of the skin or whatever has got absolutely nothing to do with it. Of course, I think expats come maybe with a slightly different style, and certainly from my experience, it is about developing the team of people beneath you. It is about empowering the team to understand and run their business. But it's really around experience.
I would answer that by saying it shouldn't make a difference, but it always will. I think just the difference in cultures will always mean an expat will communicate in a slightly different way, will be treated in a slightly different way. Over time, I can see that changing as more and more business localized, but we're probably 10 to 20 years away before it's actually seamless.
The big value of an expat is the longevity, really. And most of us, and certainly me being 50 years old, we're not here for the next 10, 15 years. So we have a very tight agenda normally. And our job isn't just to deliver that, but to deliver people behind us who will continue to deliver that. I think that's what we're being employed for, is not just our short-term direct inputs, but the people development side as well, to give the business longevity. And, as much as it being an expat coming in, it could well be a returning Indian from the States, or the colour of skin and passport, I think, is irrelevant. It's the expertise, not just to do the job, but to hand over processes and direction that the local team ultimately will take on. And the success of an expat normally is the fact they make themselves redundant and they move on in 5 years or whenever that deadline would be, and the people are behind to take the job on and improve it even further.
Mike?
I think we're really, really important, and I think we should be paid loads and loads of money by all the Indian businesses, because we're worth it. No, I think everybody here is saying the same thing, really. We've been in markets that have kind of done a lot of the stuff that's happening here, and we just bring that little bit of experience. And obviously, the longer we spend here, the more we understand India, and blend those experiences together.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, the only other point I was wanting to make is the business is changing a lot, and so I think that the world's changed, and so it's kind of becoming one retail environment. So even if you look outside of India and take Best Buy, a company that's the largest in my industry, they've recently hired a French expat to run their company, and Sony hired a British person a few years back, and those things were unheard of a few years ago. So I don't think expat being imported is the only issue. I think now it could be happen anywhere in any country. It's probably happening more in India, as these gentlemen said, because of the that retail's newer. But I think sooner or later, it's not going to matter what country you're from. It's just going to matter what you bring to the table.
So let's start with this bit about retail being newer. And for at least a couple of you, you've introduced, or you're heading companies that introduce concepts that didn't exist here at all, hypermarkets, for instance. Did it help having someone who'd had that experience in not just a developed market, but also a developing market, to come in with the learning of what can go wrong when you're setting up a business for the first time in this country?
I think one of the key things for any retail business, but particularly the hypermarket business, it is about selling a large number of SKUs in a large shop, and it's about being consistent for the consumer every day. And I think the team before me and what we've continued doing is to really focus, and it's really boring, but to really focus on process. The only way that you're able to deliver a consistent store every day for the customer is that you have a set of very clear operational processes that allow you to get the store ready for trade and maintain that. And I think one of the ongoing challenges for us, and I think in some ways inherent in every Indian's DNA, is the desire to reinvent, to change, to alter, and to not follow a process, which is on one hand wonderful, but if you want to deliver a consistent, great-looking store, you have to follow the same process. So, I give you that as an example because at the end of the day, whether you're operating 10 stores or 1,000 stores, you've got to get the basics right, and the basics are about a daily routine and a process, and really, really being consistent and following them.
Simon, you were nodding your head at that. Was that an agreement, or was he talking complete shite?
I think one of the biggest challenges that are faced by expats is bringing the best of what's worked outside of India, or my experience is China, and then making it work in a foreign culture. And I think the main challenge really is a cultural one. It's understanding how to get the best out of people, understanding why things, when they don't happen the way you want them to, when processes aren't followed, what's caused that. Because there will be a reason, and normally it's to do with communication, it's to do with how something's been said, or what exactly has been said. And it's very hard to intuitively grasp that when you've come from a very different culture.
Let me turn this back, and you can give me the logistics to do it right, to do it to world standards. Why do I need to bring in a manager who can tell me we need to hire these companies to do this for us?
Well, I guess that's always going to be up to the company of how they want to handle it, but it's been my experience, and I think the experience, with a lot of the companies, until you really have ownership and it belongs to you and you're accountable for it. All the processes and all the the consulting in the world is not going to help, because at the end of the day that person is going to leave. But I think in any business, whether it's in India or any country, the CEO or the head of operations or whatever the role is, they have to put their ownership and their stamp on it, or I just don't think it'll stick. I mean, that's been my experience. I don't know what these folks think.
Mark?
I think the issue is that people like ourselves are coming in to build teams. We could, and the easy route, of course, is to bring in consultants or experts who've worked here before. But again, those are normally short-term measures. If we can't get the thing built at the grassroots and up, then really it's truly a waste of money. I think all of us in our groups have seen consultants come and go in every single group here. And really, they do a fantastic slideshow, they do great board presentations. Everybody spends that initial sum of money, and then they, as Brian exactly said, they go away, and we find that at the grassroots level, nothing's really moved on. And I think our job is to spend time at that grassroots level, building it up. That is our function, rather than parachute people in. And also, I have to say, learning from the mistakes that we've we've all done in the past, and we've all inherited some mistakes that we've seen and we have in fact done ourselves in the past in other countries. Store size, productivity, all those things that China, for example, taking your point, you've overcome, made stores smaller, make people more productive, all the same errors or wrong paths that have been taken here as well. That's another thing for us, is correcting things as well as building things up.
Mike, on one hand, you're actually one of those consultants who tells these guys what to do. So what's your take? Does it make a difference whether you've got an expat who's heading the company, or an Indian who's heading the company, or a chimpanzee who's heading the company? At the end of it, in your role, aren't you just going to do whatever it takes for their business?
Well, of course, consultants know more than most CEOs, so we should start there from... Sorry, rubbish, absolutely. I think, coming into India... Oh, sorry. One of our activities as a company is to advise international fashion brands how to come into India. And there's a number of issues that are very critical in the beginning. With a brand, you've got emotional values. A brand stands for something in different countries. So you have to convey that emotion and the brand values into India, but at the same time you have to understand how that value might be translated here. And on the other hand, you've got the barriers of trying to get into India, which is quite painful, to bring an international brand into India successfully. So, somebody who's worked in both markets kind of adds value, I guess.
Let me ask, with all the businesses that you have, none of you have moved with an international brand in its Indian presence. You're all here with companies that have set up their own formats in various businesses. Would it have been different if you were Best Buy as opposed to Reliance Digital, or Carrefour as opposed to Hypercity, or IKEA as opposed to the Future Group? Would that have made a difference in the way you approached your business in this market?
I mean, I've actually done both. So I came with Marks and Spencer, and then 2 years ago I changed to come to Hypercity. Actually, my life has got so much easier because now I don't have to manage an overseas business, or my line boss doesn't sit in a continent on a different time zone. So in some ways, having done both, actually for me it's much easier to be working with an Indian business and developing and driving an Indian retail story.
Yeah, I would agree with Mark. I think being owned by a local player versus an international player. I know with Best Buy, as you mentioned, they've mostly failed when they've tried to go outside of their country. In England, they've closed shop. In China, they've closed their shops. And I think a lot of that is because they try to replicate what's worked in another country. I think there's an evolution that has to take place. So yes, you have to have the right best practices. Yes, you have to learn from the mistakes. But still, I think you need to adapt it and evolve with the Indian consumer. You can't take them from point A to point Z. You have to go through each point in between. And I think that's why a lot of international players, unless they're very specific, like maybe an Apple or just a single brand outlet, I think they will have trouble not just in India but in any country, and we've seen that in our industry, obviously.
Having worked for two of the larger international players, one of them being Marks and Spencer, the same as Mark, and the other one being Kingfisher Home Improvement retailer. I think the interesting thing where they add, and where I've been on the front end of their support, so-called, is their sourcing and supply chain to the country of destination. Thereafter, to be frank, apart from maybe some funding, there's no local benefit at all. I'm being very frank with you. And that's where a local partner, when it comes to FDI, or indeed local companies like we all represent at the moment here, that's really the strength. To say an international brand comes and sets up exactly as Brian mentioned, Best Buy, I remember when they opened in Shanghai, it was a total disaster because they literally did build a store as if they were building a store in the States. And the great thing is they had that great supply and range mix of product, but they didn't understand the local consumer. They really didn't, and how they wanted to shop and indeed be served. And I think that's the bit where a local vendor with our international back-end support is really a good mix at this stage of the development.
Many, many years ago, there was a book called The Irreverent Guide to Corporate America, and I haven't seen it in print in about 20 years now. But the chapter on McDonald's, for instance, said that no matter where you go in the world, if you ask for a quarter pounder, you will get it with exactly this much meat. The onion ring will be exactly this much in diameter. The tomatoes will weigh between this many grams and this many grams, and there will be between 27 and 33 sesame seeds on the bun, which is great in theory, but that no longer applies in modern retail, particularly in countries like this, does it? You can't use that cookie cutter approach. You spoke of Best Buy, both of you. You spoke of how it's failed in other markets. How do you prevent that happening? How do you do the whole local, global thing when you enter a market like India?
I think you've just raised a very good example, because whoever wrote that book would be eating his words now in India, wouldn't it? Because first of all, you can't, my sadness, can't get a hamburger, but you know, the customer profile demands a different profile of ingredients even, let alone the meat quality or whatever. And I think the same thing for us. What we've got to look at is what the international implications are on service and range, and then overlay that with any local requirements, indeed on service and range. I think it's probably, in our case, more on service than it is on range, to be truthful. Certainly in my industry. You know, the requirements in the home industry on service are as far away from DIY as you could possibly get. But that's no different to China. So, you know, it's nothing new in India. It just needs an understanding first before you go on out there and roll a DIY store out. You know, so I think we as experts, I suppose, if you call us expert expats, have that been there, done it in a developing market culture. We're not coming straight from the UK waving a flag or from the States. We've been and understood what the mix should be.
But I think the other thing is, you know, I wouldn't overplay the localization thing, because I think sometimes we get too obsessed by the fact that India is different, and therefore everything as a retailer that we do must be different. And, you know, my sense is, after being here for about 5 years, I think 80% of what retailers do is absolutely perfect for this market. It's the 20% that you localize that makes a difference. You know, at the end of the day, if I'm selling tomatoes here, or I'm selling tomatoes in China, or I'm selling tomatoes in the UK, I'm selling tomatoes. But you know, when you get into McDonald's, then you're getting into a dietary issue, and therefore you have to more localization is required. So for me, it's this kind of 80% of what retailers do well around the world will work here, and then I think the best retailers are those of us who are able to find that 20%, find the important differences, and respond to those for the customer in India.
Simon?
Yeah, I think I'm saying the same thing, just a slightly different way now. I think, yeah, there's certain principles of retail which we must believe are universal. You know, people want the products that they want them on the right prices, they want a nice store environment. And that's true here, it's true in the UK, the US, it's true in China. But what we then have to flex is, well, what are those products? What is the right price? What is a good store environment in China compared to the UK? And that involves research, it involves talking to your customers, it involves knowing the market. So for me, it's the balance of knowing what are the core principles which are invariant, and then within that, how do you make those principles live in the local environment?
Mike, is that true when you're consulting with a fashion brand coming into India? Does that 80-20 apply as well? The 80% that's shipped in container loads, the 20% that's localized. If you're Zara, if you're Marks and Sparks, are you going to tell your customers, your clients, look, you've also got to think about localizing your product for the market here?
You know, I think a lot of cases in India, the businesses have been built the wrong way around. It's the shareholders who come in and said, how much money can I make? Which should be saying, who's my customer? I love my customer, and what can I give them to love me? And that generally doesn't always happen here.
Can I bring this to the other side of the coin? As you said, Mark, at some point in time, you're here for 3 years, you're here for 5 years, you may be here for 50, but not everyone's likely to be. When you leave, what happens? does the company then have to rely on someone else parachuting into the country to take over the job that you were doing? Or over those 3 years, those 5 years, those 50, are you building that local base? Not to say that, okay, we must have local managers as well because it's politically correct, but because the economics of the business demand that at some point in time you look within that city or that district to find the people who are going to run the business.
There's a real balancing act at this stage in modern retail, I think, here. We've come in with, as you say, the 3, 5. You know, I don't think any of us probably go past the double digits, so realistically. But the key thing is our job as part of the business development is people development, which in China today is very topical because they're year 10 plus of that modern retail growth. Reality here is we're still relatively early on. So retention of people at this stage is A, crucial, but B, extremely difficult. And certainly, you know, it tends to revolve around, at this moment, salaries rather than value. And value for me, in terms of coming from the West, isn't just about what you get paid every month. It's about some of the long-term vision of your career development, training, a bonus scheme that maybe looks for 5 years rather than what you get paid every October.
I'm sorry, can I just interrupt? You actually know employees in retail who look at the long-term career development?
I think, yes. Outside of India, yes. And even in China, yes now. But in this early stage of India, people are looking, or dare I say, to put a black picture on, monthly. You know, and I quoted you examples of only this month when we do our annual reviews, people who thought 30% was far too low. And are being quoted, and people are being poached because there aren't just enough people in modern retail. So our job, apart from people development, is actually to put in schemes with our main boards that are talk about retention rather than just annual salary increases and what we can afford. And retention is an important one if we're going to truly grow modern retail.
Right.
Well, even when I worked in the United States, I sometimes was transferred to different states away from my home, and even there I felt like it was my responsibility to leave my position with someone from the community that is from that area, that wants to stay there, that's part of that area. And I feel it's the same thing here. I mean, ultimately, when I leave India, I don't want to see someone else come in. I want someone that has been on the journey, that's from here, you know, and has a passion and love for this business. And I think that's, you know, I think your number one duty as any leadership role is to train your replacement. And to me, it says more about you as a leader when you leave, how the company performs than while you're there. So that would be my view.
Is there that potential in the countries in which you parachute, whether it's China, whether it's India? Are we looking at double digits in terms of years before you have that level of management that takes your place, or the place of those just one below you?
I think there's a real danger in short-term expat contracts, and by short-term, kind of mean anything under 3 years. And I've seen this a few times where an expat comes out and they've got a remit to make this part of the business look like Europe, and then within 6 months they think, this is just not going to happen, it's not achievable, it's too much of a challenge. And disillusionment sets in, become demotivated, they realise, well, I'm just going to play out my time here and then find a better job back home. And I think there's two factors there. One, the term for being in the country wasn't long enough. Second, the expectation of what could be done in that time was wrong. So I think businesses, they need to get the term right, and they need to be realistic about what can be achieved within that term.
Mark, you went, as you said, from Marks & Spencer to your current role, similar in a certain sense, but also very different in the industries or the consumers that they approach. Let's talk about this short-term, long-term contract business. You're here for a couple of years with Marks & Spencer, and then you figure, oh, what the hell, here's a better job at Hypercity, so why don't I go over there instead? I've got a nicer house. I'm on the first hole at the golf course instead of the 17th. It's a nicer car. What is it? What keeps you here, and what makes you go from the one to the other?
Okay. I came with M&S to set the business up, and I ran it for a year. And then naturally, it was time to go back and take up a different appointment with M&S. I think a couple of things collided at the same time. One, I'd been with M&S for a long time. Secondly, the Indian, in terms of being involved in an industry that was just starting. You know, the option of going back to the UK and running a retail business, and in a good year, nibbling some market share off somebody else, and in a bad year, losing a bit of market share, probably had lost its appeal. And I think the opportunity here to work with businesses that are just starting out, so M&S was really just starting out in India in the way that we wanted to grow it in the future. Hypercity, you know, we've got 12 stores now, we had 7 back then, so again, we're just starting on the journey. So that was really the appeal. I think personally I'm extremely lucky. My wife loves living in India. My children also enjoy being here. So I don't have perhaps some of the challenges that other expats may or may not have in terms of, you know, that pull to go back to home country whenever that is. So and in terms of, you know, a lifestyle retailer to a hypermarket, you know, at the end of the day, customers are customers, and we're trying to buy a product at one price and hopefully sell it at a slightly higher price. So the products are different, but what we do is very similar. So that's kind of my journey.
I'm going to put you on the spot again, all of you. Just to take off on a point that you raised about going back to the UK in a difficult time and trying to build a business over there. Does it look great on your CV to come into a market like India where you've got 30% year-on-year growth simply because you're coming off a really, really low base or non-existent base, rather than being in the UK, being in the US, being in France or Germany right now, where if you were lucky you'd see 2 or 3% year-on-year growth? Is that a factor in deciding where you're going to be? First man to reach the mic gets extra points.
Okay, I'll have a go. Interesting. My view would be on an internal CV. So on an internal CV, a lot of companies don't have a very good track record of bringing expats back. You know, because naturally what happens, you disappear for 3 to 5 years, life moves on in your home organization, they're not holding a position open for you. So actually I think what it tends to help you is it tends to help you with your CV in an external way. And I think the experience, the rich experience of being an expat and working in different and challenging markets very much adds to your CV from an external perspective. But I think it's quite hard for expats to readjust to the same organization back in the home country, which certainly is an experience I had. I don't know whether that's shared by other people.
Yeah, I mean, I've been there and done that and gone back into Kingfisher in its UK headquarters, and then indeed into a couple of the operating companies. And reality is, you know, for us to go back into the big corporate world and the machine is extremely difficult, if not, dare I say, impossible, because so many of us have had a much greater bandwidth operating in countries like this. And therefore, if we do go back, we tend inevitably to find ourselves in, which is almost impossible in today's economy, business development roles in the States or business development roles in Europe, which at the moment, as you said, there are few and far between. So I think you will continue to see people like us for a little bit more longer.
That's, you've just given me my career history there, actually. So I was in China as the country head for 4 years, and then the Asia head came out to the same office, and exactly that happened. Suddenly, from being the kind of head honcho, you're another fish in the pond, and I'm now in a business development role across Asia. So yeah, you're quite right.
Mike?
No, I think most of Europe realises that, you know, over 60% of the speaking population of the world are now in this part of the world. And I just think, you know, from my personal point of view, it's a challenge, but an exciting one to bring brands that we've worked with for the last 20 years in Europe and try and bring them here in the same way, but give them maybe a little bit of colour that India has naturally.
It's hard for me to say. I don't really think that way as far as my CV. I've only had one job before this one. and I'd never been out of the United States until I moved here, my first day on the job. And to me, I have a passion for this particular business, and I started as a salesperson in it, and it's really all I want to do. So I'm not really that worried about my CV or what numbers are on there or where I'll go from here. I think we're trying to build something special here, and then when that's done, then hopefully I go back and retire, I guess, one way or the other.
Okay, I'm going to throw one last question to you before I walk into the audience. When you're in the business in which you are, when you've got local shareholders, local partners, whatever it might be, as I said, none of you are here with the international brand coming in here. You're all here with local businesses that have chosen to build their own brands, whether it's Hypercity, whether it's Reliance, whether it's the Future Group. Is there a difference? Is there a business difference between having that local group, as you said, Brian, behind you? Do they make things easier, or do they make things more difficult? On the one hand, they know the ropes, they know which wheels need to be greased. On the other hand, you're dealing with a bunch of people who've been running things their way for the last 20, 30, 40, in some cases 100 years, and they're very loath to change or adapt to the kind of practices you want to bring in. Is it hard? Is it easy? Which way would you go if you were to do it again?
I think we probably all have different experiences. I work for Reliance, and Reliance is it's a relatively new company if you think of 30 some years, and they've already shown a tremendous, I think it started as a textile business, petroleum, telecom, now retail. So they're very progressive, obviously, and I think they have a passion for growth and providing. They see an opportunity in the market and go for it. And for me, it's very easy to work there. I have a lot of support, and it's a good group. So. Maybe they're filming me now, hopefully. So,
yeah.
So they would know. You can send this to Mr. Ambani, please.
Yeah, Mukesh, I promise you the tape. It's on its way.
No, I touched on this a little earlier. For me, the experience it's actually easier. I have the Rahages, a superb promoter group, and the philosophy is very simple. If the model is working, we'll back you. If the model isn't working, we'll pause while you fix the model. And I think their experience with Shopper Stop and then with Hypercity is exactly the same. So for me, actually, on that relationship point of view, it's actually much easier having the promoter group here than being in overseas somewhere.
And I think it's, as you kind of referenced in the question, it's the choice between, is it better to have good relationships or better to have good processes? And my experience of China is relationships win out every single time. So I think it's much more likely to be successful if you go in, partner or acquire an existing business and make use of those existing relationships.
Mark?
I think the local guys who have been there and know how, as you say, the things are oiled, I think that helps tremendously, obviously. Our job really is to agree the strategy and ensure, again, at the grassroots things go that way. That, it should almost be, dare I say, to a degree, a given, the support and the guidance you get from above. The more important thing that we have to do over the time that we're here is really build the business from below. And I think that's what we're all here trying to do. And the local thing isn't a hindrance at all. If it's a good board, then the direction you're going. If it's a bad board anywhere in the world, it's a bad board, and things will not progress. And that's not India. That's a general statement.
Mike, in your experience, has there been a difference between dealing with a local company trying to work with international brands, or with an international brand just saying we're going to come in here and do things on our own?
I think in my role, one of my main roles really is to try and match the expectations of both parties. I'm kind of the guy in the middle that tries to tell the European brands, India's a little bit like this is likely to happen. And the same with the Indian partners, it's, their expectations are going to be this. And I try and get them as close as I can before they actually meet each other. And then it's up to them, with my help, to build that understanding. So, it's getting them to understand each other, I think. And then if you get to that point, I guess you can then start moving forward positively.
Okay, let me walk down and see if anyone in the audience is actually awake or whether we've just been talking amongst ourselves. So, how many people in the room here have, okay, just a quick show of hands. How many people in here have expat bosses? How many people in the room have an expat boss who's sitting on the stage? How many people in the room would like their expat boss to shut his eyes and his ears while they really tell me what they think? Okay.
Hi, my name is Rajiv Chetri. I'm from Nokia. So I had two questions, but I think one you've already answered. So my first question was, what are the key challenges that you faced in India, to which you guys have answered in terms of process, culture, and retaining people? The second question which I had was, what are the three key lessons that you've learned while operating in India? And what advice would you give to a new expat CEO who's supposedly coming to India?
Anyone want to take that?
I'll go first. I'm cheating slightly because my experience is China rather than India. But I actually asked that same question of Raj Jain, CEO of Walmart, regarding the kind of Indian culture. And he said, in his experience, the best expats are willing to listen more than they are to talk, certainly within the first 5 years of being in the market. And I think that's solid advice. You listen more than you talk.
Just to add to that, really, I think there also needs to be an element, dare I say, of non-compromise, because the danger is you look too much at the whole, and I think Mark touched on it earlier, the whole localization. And it's interesting, I've done 8 countries now, and within the first week of joining every single place, I hear virtually word for word one of my senior managers take me aside and say, Mark, you need to understand things happen differently in. And I've heard that for Dubai 20 years ago, I heard it for South Africa 25 years ago, China 10 years ago, and here 2 and a bit years ago. And reality is, it's different from the West, yes, but in developing markets, 80% is exactly the same. There will be a curve, it may be a slightly steeper or slightly lower curve, as in the case, I think, in India, a lower, longer curve. But the curve is there, and the learnings will all be pretty much the same, whether it be operations, people, or process.
I don't have a lot to add, I guess. I think the advice I would give is be patient, and stay away from trying to force things into a mold, and just take the opportunity to kind of immerse yourself, understand the customer, and just go from there. And then draw on your retail background to develop something new, but don't try to implement something that's already, may or may not have worked in the past. So that would probably be the best advice I could give a new CEO.
Can I throw this one open, actually? We talked about the fact that none of you are here with a brand that's entering India. What advice would you give an incoming CEO of Nokia in this market, given who they are, given what their market is? Now you all have an understanding of what they do. You understand retail. What would you do if you were coming in as head of Nokia now?
I'd probably switch to Apple. No, just kidding. No, look, Nokia is a great company, and I think they're turning around their business. So I think it's the same advice I would give anybody. You just really have to understand your customer and anticipate and change. I mean, earlier you mentioned McDonald's, and I remember when they opened the first McDonald's where I was from, and if I went into one in the United States now, it's nothing like it was. So no business can stay stagnant, and the things that may have worked in the past are not going to work in the future, whether you're in India or any country, really. I mean, I don't think it matters, but it's my 2 cents.
I mean, it was touched on before, but I think one word, it's patience. And, after you get over the fact that 80% works and it's the 20% of localization, then after that it's patience. And I don't think we'll get away from the fact that India is a wonderful marketplace, this land of opportunity, and the opportunity is hanging there. But being able to grasp that opportunity and being able to make it happen, it takes time. And I think for any international player, whatever product they're selling, they just need to really get their head around the time aspect and be patient.
Mark, you had something to add?
I think just, I'm a bit of a funny one when it comes to Nokia and mobile phones. I'm quite happy with my BlackBerry, and the fact that if RIM's going out of fashion, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do, because I've spent 5 years glued to that damn thing. But the one thing I think we all have, whether it be from the electronics industry or like Mark and I from very varied fields, we all have a vision of where some of these markets will be happening because we see trending going on internationally. We've got very much an international eye. And, you know, I've just taken as an example with the Galaxy 3 that Samsung just launched. And my son, of course, is telling me all the benefits of it. But as a retailer, the way they're retailing it here, just as a simple product, buy it or not, and this is the price, versus the way they're marketing it in the States. I saw recently as a package with a tablet, or in the UK as a get it for free, but with a 24-month contract and a tablet and something else. Those are the things that, you know, we can bring back to this market. You know, coming in as a CEO from something isn't just getting your feet on the ground, it's also keeping your ears open as well to what's going out there and finding the things that are adaptable and bringing them in as well. And it's important to keep that mix going.
Can I ask the audience, we've heard about this bit about, well, we talked about patience, we talked about how everyone pulls you aside at some point in your career and says, things are done differently here. Are they really done differently here? Are we really so divorced from other markets, from other economies, from other geographies? Is our retail business so different from other places in the world that when someone comes into the country, they're told it doesn't work that way over here? Is that really true?
Hi, I think in India we tend to grow so fast without really building, really training the people. Most time you go to the store, people don't know what actually they're selling, and that I find is a big problem here.
Can I just point out that's true anywhere in the world? But that's a quick aside.
You know, I come from Indonesia, and I find that people love retailing. I've gone across to Southeast, I've gone to Europe, and people are quite proud of the work that they're doing. Whereas I think here the infrastructure is so tough, whether social or physical infrastructure, that I find that love for doing something fantastic is much lower right now.
Okay, gentlemen, here's the question to you. I asked about what you were doing in building that second layer, in building that person who was going to take over from you when you left 3 or 5 years from now. What about all the way at the very bottom? What about the guy that I see when I walk into your hypermarket and I'm walking through the aisles, or that guy who's selling me a new iPhone, or the guy who's selling me a cupboard, or whatever it might be? That person on the shop floor, what are you doing to bring in best practices to change the way they sell to me?
Okay. I think the honest answer is, you know, we're not doing enough yet. And if I have a look, if I tell you what the customers say about Hypercity, they say, we love your stores, we love the range, we like the hygiene and the way you run the stores, and your service is okay. And you're a little bit expensive. So we're dealing with the little bit expensive. We're starting to deal with the service is okay. And I think one of the challenges, as in other industries, is, you know, retail is it's an entry point into the workforce. And, you know, we all have very high attrition. And for 100 rupees, one of my front-end guys will move and go to the competition. And the reality is, you know, it doesn't matter how good we are as CEOs, on a daily basis, who does the customer meet? The customer meets in my hypermarket the person on the checkout. So it's hugely, hugely important for us. And we have to focus on it. We are focusing on it, but we've not done enough yet. It's a challenge anywhere in the world. I don't think it's a unique challenge to India, because that's the nature of retail and the nature of people that work in it. I think, again, it's, you know, how do you do it? It's okay, of course, it's about money. But it's about training and it's about empowerment. It's about allowing that front-end individual to be able to make a difference to the consumer when they come in. And as I say, we're starting on that journey, and we've got a fairly long way to go.
Yeah, building belief, I think, is one of the things that we've got to do. If we do believe ourselves and have a passion for something, and I think we all have in retail, you know, it's our lives. That's all I've ever done, pretty much. Not only is it okay to share that passion, hopefully get people riding the wave with you, but I think the building belief needs to come from their own experience, which in the case of, for example, the buying team, cannot just be going to Canton Fair twice a year and then sitting in the office in Mumbai. And in fact, you know, it requires investment, it requires time and money. about really exposing people to the global retail market. Some of it may be a long-term view even. It's not something that they'll come back and do tomorrow, exactly replicating what we saw in Copenhagen. But it's something that will give them a view for the next 2-3 years. And retention, those 3 years is what it's about. If we're going to leave something behind, it's not what it looks like tomorrow. It is literally after we've gone and carrying on that path. And it's very, very important, we as people, I think that's a major part of our responsibility, is building that belief in retail and international retail.
Yeah, and I think just in addition to that point, the role of culture within an organisation is massively important. And what the leaders can do is really create what that culture should be, what that business is going to stand for. And they can start to permeate that through the organisation. If that's done well, then recruitment of the right people happens naturally, because people are looking for people who share that same culture and that same value system. Training happens naturally because training just gets aligned to the culture and to the value system, but it all comes from the top.
Okay, to 5 of you gentlemen, I mean, rest be assured, the empire will strike back soon in terms of Nokia. The second thing I wanted to your question, you know, I mean, what is so different? I think, you know, my personal belief is it's about culture. You know, I mean, I think it's about managing the differences in culture wherever you are in China or India, because different countries have different cultures, especially in India, because India is such a fragmented market. You have cultures changing within a radius of 200 kilometers. So I feel the only difference between, you know, the West or US or Europe and Southeast Asia is the culture. I think that has to be taken care of. I don't know, they would agree with me or not. You can ask them.
Is there a cultural difference? Not just in the way your consumers pick up the products off your shelves, but in the way your people sell them. Is there a cultural difference in the countries? Of course there is. But is there a difference in your store?
Yeah, difference in the store, I must admit I'm quite intransigent on that. I think no. If we can help it, no. We can't run regional formats. I think where it comes in is the assortment mix. You may have an assortment of 100 SKUs. The volume mix across that assortment, of course, changes. But the skill of a buyer has to be about that assortment that caters for the market. If you start dissecting volume by region and start buying, it's a different, obviously, case in food, but in my industry, buying regionally and adapting things regionally, you'll never be a modern retail player because you'll never get that scale and efficiency and productivity. So the 80-20, and it is always the 80-20 rule, does come in. There will be some 20% of a tail that doesn't sell, but reality is it may be a different tail in each of the markets. You know, it may be different in Calcutta as it is to Mumbai, but the point is the 100% assortment is what you put on the shelf, and over the pool of India you get your volume, and I think that's where we need to be. If we get trapped in this localization thing, we can't really add the value of a modern retail that we should be doing.
What about culture within the stores, within your organization? Is there a difference in the culture amongst your people that then translates down to the shop floor or down within the organization?
To be honest, I really don't think there is. I mean, you know, there are cultural differences, but in terms of how people interact, how people work in stores, I think it's the same here as in West or other markets. You know, the store guys don't think the buyers buy the right stuff, and the buyers don't think the store guys sell it properly. And that dimension is happening and playing out in every country where there's a retail store. So I don't think there's any difference. In terms of customers, you know, I also don't buy the fact that the Indian consumer is any more demanding. And, you know, we've had some interesting conversations about how far will we push our promise to the customer, and had lots of concerns internally that the consumer here is going to take advantage, which I don't buy. You know, I think the consumer here is demanding, the consumer in China is demanding, the consumer in London is demanding. So again, it's a mindset thing, I think.
Yeah, wait till you meet my wife and daughter, then you'll know what demanding really is.
Hi, I just wanted to ask the panelists here, what are your views on multi-brand retail entering India? Would it make life easier or more difficult for you all?
I think everyone on stage is pretty much multi-brand retailers, aren't you?
I think he's referring to FDI, right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of talk about it. I don't know what it would really mean. I think ultimately it's just about what you can offer to the customer, and the customer is always going to pick what the best options are. And sure, there's a lot of excitement anytime they're thinking of, could I have a Walmart or a Carphone or a Best Buy or whatever it is here, but what would you like about that brand that you can't get right here? And it's up to us to provide that experience at a world-class level. And if we can do that, then it doesn't matter where the retailer's from, in my view. But, we carry specific products, obviously, that are available everywhere. My view is probably a little different, but at the end of the day, I feel like we owe India the best experience in the world. And if we can't provide it and someone else comes in and does it, then that's on us.
No, listen, I agree. It's great for the consumer, and that's what it's about. And whether it's an Indian retailer or an international retailer, competition is great. The good guys will get better, and the not so good guys will give up and go away. So it's good news, I think.
What are the obstacles to scaling up that you encounter in India as opposed to some other countries where you've been from an expat perspective? What are the obstacles you face while scaling up your business, increasing number of stores and footprint?
So I didn't get all of that. I think, what are the obstacles of
you
growing
face?
the business?
Yeah, in growing the business and scaling up and opening more stores, how is India different from other markets that you've been in?
I think simple is a four-letter word: cost. In terms of relation to sales, investment in store openings, but whether it be the rental or the cost of actually delivering further and further afield, a supply chain. To be frank, some of the highest I've ever dealt with, and at the same time almost as unreliable as I've ever dealt with. So whether that be malls taking 2 years to fully open, whether it takes what should in theory take 3 to 4 days between Nagpur and Calcutta actually takes 14 days, and indeed costs you 8% to sales. Those are the sorts of things that will hold us back in terms of growth. There are many malls being opened. Whether you can actually afford and indeed make money there is, I think, what our duty is very easy to spread quickly, but we've got to be sure that we can, within 12, 18 months, be in a place that will make the shareholders money. And I think that's the biggest thing that will keep most of us relatively cautious and not bullish.
For us, it's pretty simple. The biggest challenge to scaling up is interstate transportation and taxation, and just the products that have to get caught at the borders between states. It makes it very, very difficult. In fact, if I was in a country this size anywhere else, I would operate probably 3 distribution centers. I have 23 because any state I operate in, I have to have a distribution center, or I have to pay tax every time I transport the item. That makes our margins unprofitable. So I think until that problem gets fixed, it's going to be tough to really see a lot of companies scale up to the level that you might see in other countries.
Hi, I have a question not to Mr. Mark Ashman, but to the other panelists, especially Brian and Mark. See, in my experience, what I've seen is when an expat comes to India, obviously you have a lot of experience from your company over there. Let's say it's Best Buy, it's Tesco or Walmart, and since you're here on a certain mission or a certain period, you definitely bring in those strengths back here, and suddenly the Indian format starts looking like a Tesco. Everybody there is thinking in that direction of a process, like becoming a Tesco or a Walmart. And what happens, so I have 2 parts of the question. What happens is, when now the FDI opening up and Tesco in India or Walmart coming in India, they are doing the similar talking. There's another format also working on a similar line of thinking. So how do you sort of, bring in the unique preposition to mix in your strengths, what you bring in internationally, and what you are going to leave here? It sort of differentiates for a consumer. And also post after 3-5 years, when you decide to move out, what you leave back so that the next person coming in takes across the same culture and is not again making it something else, because that sort of causes a whole confusion. And I've seen that, so I'm just asking to the panelists.
That's a really good question, actually. Once you leave, how do you keep the same culture, how do you keep the same practices alive even with the next person coming in? Or do we suddenly go from, I used to be at Tesco, so this is what we're going to do, and I used to be at Walmart, so now we're going to throw everything that was there earlier out?
I think the question in its way answers itself, those 2 parts, because reality is, coming from a developed market, is there a difference between Tesco, Sainsbury's, or is there a difference between Marks & Spencer food and Waitrose food? The reality is no. The differentiation is made by the pace of change. Because ultimately, if there is no change, everybody gravitates to the same thing, which I think is where we are today. Our job is to actually not define a format and stick to it. Our job is to get to a consistent level and keep it moving consistently. That's the way you compete against another international retailer coming in, or indeed give some longevity to your business, is not sticking to something, but actually establishing a base and then keep growing that base. In terms of the way you differentiate your proposition to a customer, you know, as Mark said, a tomato is always going to be a tomato. You know, but it's how you deliver the tomato, which makes Waitrose at the moment the fastest growing retailer in the UK. He's made a deliberate effort to sell tomatoes in a different way to everybody else. That's our job, to bring those changes in, not to be just purely consistent. So it will compete against incoming entrants, and it will keep growing and leave a longevity for our people to keep growing the format.
I think a couple parts on that is the real answer to the question is that we have to build it together with the team that I have, and my vision of what I wanted to implement 2 years back when I came is radically different now, because I've learned from my team. Hopefully they've learned some things from me. I've learned from their leadership experience, from their consumer experience, and it's an evolution, right? So when I leave, ultimately the team won't go back to doing things a different way because they built this process, and it's up to me to show them value. And if I'm showing them value, then they'll continue to use it. If I'm showing them something that's a redundant process that doesn't really add value to the table, then they should scrap it when I leave, ultimately.
Okay, great answer politically. Now I'm going to be a complete bastard because I've got a microphone in my hand and I can afford to be. And I'm going to throw the question to these three young people from Hypercity over here. Has there been a difference in Hypercity and the way you guys work from the time, let's say, Andrew Livermore was here, and now that you've got Mark? Come on, honesty. Hello, Mark.
Yeah, I'm going to take that one since I've been with this company right from day one. Yeah, I guess it's been an interesting experience from Andrew to Mark, or whichever case, and both have added equal or more value in the business. So there's definitely a good reason to have an expat boss, especially in the hypermarket business, because currently I don't think in India there are too many leaders who can bring the experience, the differentiation, or the learning that we require. I think because of that is one of the reasons why we have been also able to build Hypercity as a completely differentiated business, and today has a differentiated positioning in terms of the overall hypermarket space in the country.
You didn't answer my question. Did you end up throwing out the baby with the bathwater when you changed bosses? And for political correctness, you get 5 points. Now shut up and give me a real answer.
The best I could.
What a bunch of wimps you employ, Mark. What a bunch of wimps. Now, let me ask you, do you think there's been a change in the way your company has operated? Brand new concept in India. You had a CEO who brought in his vision of how it should be run. You come in. You're absolutely right, Mark. There is no difference between selling Marks and Sparks food and Waitrose food or any other product. But when you came in, did you find there were things you had to change? There were things that you thought could be done better, that could be done differently?
No, listen, I think the skills are different. I mean, Andrew and the team took a concept from nothing and opened the first real hypermarket in Malad. And, you know, it's an amazing achievement, and today continues to be an amazing achievement. I think, you know, Andrew came from a product and a buying background. Mine is much more an operational background. So we come with different skills. And I think the trick should really be, you know, the businesses should not lurch from the personality of one CEO to the next expat CEO. And I think the skill is for the incoming CEO to listen and understand what are the needs of the business at the time when they join it, and then, you know, work with the team to develop it. So, you know, Andrew and the team launched the business. very clear brief for me coming in is to say, right, we have a business, we like the model, but it's not making any money. So how do we get it to a model that begins to make money, and then we can accelerate growth again? So two very, very different challenges for the business at very different times. I think where it would be very wrong and where it's very damaging and it puts the business back is if your incoming CEO wants to completely change the direction of the organization or completely put their personality on the organization. And that's ultimately the job of the board, to make sure that they select an individual who they believe brings the right skills for that time and the development of the business at that time. So
and that really is the answer, isn't it? You have to run it as a business, as a company, not about the individual who's coming in there. And you adapt to the skill sets that are required for the business as it grows. Ask you guys in the space of a minute or two each to tell me what you wouldn't do again were you to be parachuted into a different economy, into a different market. Of all the learnings, we've talked about what you would do, what you have brought to the table, what you have brought to that company and that business. What would you not do? What's the learning that says, okay, don't ever do that again anywhere?
I think I'll take a leaf out of the book of my colleague on the left. I would be a bit more confident that actually there are similar problems and the solutions are more similar than you might think. There's a danger as a new expat, you assume, well, everything's different. I've got to bide my time before I make a decision. I would be a bit more confident, actually, no, my gut instinct is right. I can push this through faster.
All right, we'll start at that end.
Going to be very boring. I would say the same. I mean, if I was coming in again, I'd probably be just a little less patient, and I'd be pushing a little harder to move things forward.
Brian?
Well, I think I made loads of mistakes, but I guess overall, I think these folks have said it earlier. I wouldn't listen to people that tell me things have to be a certain way here. I wasted a lot of time doing that. In India it has to be this way. In India it has to be this way. When I knew it was not the right thing for the consumer. And the sooner I came around past that, the sooner I was able to move the organization on. So I probably would have just assumed that what works best in the world is most likely going to work here too, and as long as you keep the customer first.
Yeah, I think I've got an answer actually. I think the danger, and as we've all done it a few times, I think, is to get stuck in the business and the business issues around profitability, and try and change the assortment plan or review the nitty-gritty of the business. I think if I was to come here again, in another life, I wouldn't do that. I would have actually probably stood back on the business for as long as I could and really worked damn hard on understanding the dynamics of the people in the business first. I had totally underestimated, in my view, the issues that I was going to face this past 2.5 years around either a lack of training or indeed a huge staff churn that I was about to face and have faced for the last 2 years. So if I'd have invested more time up front on people right at the very beginning, I think it would have helped me to where I am now get a lot quicker and a lot smoother.
Valid point. Mike?
Having a slightly different role here, the thing I would concentrate almost immediately is the Indian fashion consumer is exactly the same as every other fashion consumer in the world.
Gentlemen, thank you very much.